Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar for the Ontario Music Investment Fund, or OMIF for short. We're about to kick off the second year of delivering these information sessions virtually. We do hope that you and your loved ones are all managing to keep safe and well. My name is Aisha Wickham. I'm joined by my colleague, Michelle Holtzskinner, and we are two of the Ontario Music Office's 3 program consultants. Michelle and I will be co-presenting today on the music creation stream of the OMIF. Ontario Creates is an agency of the Government of Ontario that facilitates economic development, investment, and collaboration in Ontario's creative industries, including the music, book, magazine, film, television, and interactive digital media sectors. For today's session, we'll be taking you through an overview of the music creation stream. The presentation will take about 40 minutes, and then we'll be opening up the session to take questions. We're going to have our cameras off for the presentation, and we'll turn them back on for the Q&A portion. You should be able to adjust your thumbnail view as it works best for you for screen viewing. And in order to best manage the Q&A period, we ask that you please type your question into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll be going through them at the end of the session. And our colleague, Noah Grunier, who's our program coordinator, will help us filter through, and we'll get through your questions at the end. We do ask that you keep your questions as relevant to the overall audience as possible. And also for questions that are unique or specific to your company, we just ask that you follow up with us after the session so we can provide a more tailored response to your particular situation. And of course, if a question comes up to you after the session, you can always contact us later by email or via setting up a call. After this session, we'll be posting the presentation on the music creation page of our website for your quick reference, but it's really important that we reiterate the importance of reviewing the guidelines in details, as this slide presentation is an overview and does not replace the guidelines. In 2020 and 2021, the OMIF replaced the former Ontario Music Fund, following a reduction in funding to the OMF in 2019 and a subsequent program review, which included industry consultations. The changes that have been made to the program reflect the government's current priorities. Broadly, the OMIF is intended to provide targeted economic development investment to the province's vibrant and diverse music industry, with a strong focus on supporting company and industry growth and developing emerging artists. The program's 3 streams are tailored to different parts of the industry. The OMIF has some key goals that are important to keep in mind when you're preparing your application. The program focus is on supporting high potential music companies and investing in their long-term growth, while maximizing ROI for the province and increasing opportunities for emerging talent by targeting support at the critical stages of artists' careers. Some anticipated outcomes include creating jobs and increasing revenue, profits, and private investment in the province, developing content or intellectual property for domestic and international markets that will lead to sustained revenues and jobs in the province, and increasing Ontario's profile internationally by helping to support the discovery and development of breakthrough artists. The OMIF is designed to support companies across the music ecosystem in Ontario. As I mentioned, there are 3 program streams that are focused on supporting different parts of the industry. The music creation stream is focused on supporting music companies that take risks in developing talent and bringing it to market through activities such as recording, marketing and promotion, touring and publishing. This program launched on April 29th, and we'll touch on the deadline in an upcoming slide. The live music stream is focused on supporting live music companies that promote and present music events featuring Canadian artists, including musical festivals and concert series. This stream will launch in late summer. The Music Industry Initiative stream is focused on supporting music industry trade associations and music service organizations for activities that have broad music industry benefit, such as professional development and training initiatives, export activities, industry analysis, and data gathering to build regional capacity. This program stream launched yesterday and also has a distinct program that provides export and market development funding for music management companies through the Global Market Development for Music Managers program, also called MII-GMD, to support participation in national and international activities that correspond to a strategy for company growth. And the MII-GMD program is launching today, and you can get all of the specifics on these programs on the respective program pages on our website. Please be sure to also review, in addition to the guidelines, our new program policies document. It contains more specifics on our policies regarding respectful workplaces, diversity, and accessibility. There's a link to this document on page 3 of the guidelines, and it can also be downloaded directly from the music creation page on our site. All applicants must sign an applicant affidavit confirming that their company has both guiding principles as well as a process for maintaining a respectful workplace, which is one that values diversity, equity, and inclusion, dignity, courteous conduct, fairness, positive communication, and a professional working environment that is free from harassment and discrimination. The program policies document also outlines some key information regarding the application submission process, reporting requirements, and other obligations of successful applicants. And it also contains a full sample agreement template. Ontario Creates is committing to helping to tangibly increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within the creative industries. Our agency values and supports diversity and gender parity at all levels and business roles. We do acknowledge that many communities continue to face systemic barriers that prevent them from participating meaningfully in these industries. As such, Ontario Creates applies a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion across multiple evaluation criteria for our programs. Michelle will be touching more on that a bit later in the application assessment section of the presentation. Applicants that are proposing activities that support, reflect, and strengthen gender parity and diversity in Ontario are expected to demonstrate a genuine and sustained commitment to these equity-seeking communities. And further, Ontario Creates encourages applications from companies that are led by Black and Indigenous individuals, people of color, Francophone individuals, and applicants that otherwise meet the provincial definition of diversity. You'll find this on page 2 of the program policies document, along with the definition of equity-seeking communities. Exceptions to the program's eligibility requirements will be considered for applicants from high potential companies among these equity-seeking communities. Essentially, this includes communities that have faced historic, systemic, and social marginalization and barriers based on factors such as disability, economic status, gender, race, sexual orientation, and transgender status. We do encourage any of our stakeholders from these communities to please contact us, ideally at least 3 weeks ahead of the application deadline, to discuss your particular situation if you are close to meeting eligibility but might need some flexibility. And Michelle will expand a bit more on those exceptions in her overview of the music creation stream. And with that, I will pass it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Aisha. Okay, so the deadline for a complete submission is Thursday, July 15th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time through the Ontario Creates online application portal, fondly referred to as the OAP. Applications, as well as all documentation received after this deadline, will not be considered. Please note that there is a new system in place with respect to the eligibility window. You will now have the flexibility with respect to the start date of your spending window for your approved activities, which should enable you to undertake projects at a time when it's most advantageous to your business cycle, instead of trying to fit them within our prescribed window. So I'm going to walk you through this very quickly, but Aisha will be speaking to it in greater detail a little later on. So there will be a recap with examples. So if you're not following along right now, don't worry about it. So activity spending may begin once you've submitted an application, although this is at your own risk because obviously the application will have yet to be approved. If you choose to start spending immediately after submission, you also must have a valid insurance certificate in place at that time. You may begin incurring expenses no earlier than the date of application submission and no later than 90 days following the date of funding approval, which should be in October. So the latest you would be able to start spending would be January-ish, so 90 days from the date of funding approval. Applicants that receive funding will have 12 consecutive months to execute their activities. The spending window commences on the date that the first expenditure is incurred for any activity within the application. So please review page 4 of the guidelines for a detailed explanation of the eligibility requirements, but the key points will be outlined here. So all eligible applicants must have minimum revenues of $25,000 from core business activities, be incorporated in Canada and be in operation for at least 2 years, have a head office in Ontario, have key management personnel who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents living within the province, and be in good standing with Ontario Creates at the time of application. And all that really means that if you are a past applicant, that all your reports have been submitted on time and that all of your documentation is up to date. As Aisha just mentioned, exceptions to the program's eligibility requirements may be considered for applications from companies that are led by Black and Indigenous individuals, people of color, Francophone individuals, and those from other equity-seeking communities. First-time applicants absolutely must contact the Ontario Music Office a minimum of 3 weeks in advance of the deadline to discuss eligibility. And by contact, we mean actually engage with us, speak to us, don't just send an email. We want to make sure that you are in fact eligible, but at the same time, we would like the opportunity to guide you so you're able to submit your strongest application possible. Also, for any of you listening that may have been past applicants 2 or 3 years ago, let's say, and have not recently applied for funding, we also highly recommend that you contact us as well because things have changed. So in addition to the details listed on the previous slide, there are specific eligibility requirements for the 2 applicant types that are eligible in the music creation stream: record labels, both domestic and international, and domestic music publishers. The full OMIF definitions of both are outlined in Appendix 1 of the guidelines, but the gist of it is here on the screen for you to see. Also, due to the realities of historical and systemic barriers within the music industry, Ontario Creates will consider, as Aisha mentioned, high potential, self-releasing Black and Indigenous artist entrepreneurs as record labels for the purpose of eligibility for funding within the agency. So if this applies to you, please contact us if you haven't done so already to discuss your potential eligibility. Funding is provided in the form of direct grants towards a share of your total cost of eligible activities. The OMIF contribution may not exceed 50% of the total approved budget. This simply means that we match your investment dollar for dollar. The minimum amount that can be requested is $10,000, and the maximum funding request is $350,000 per year. You may apply for up to 40% of your company's 2-year average revenues for your 2 most recently completed fiscal years. So in most cases, this will be 2019 and 2020. I'll show you on the next two slides a few examples on how to calculate your maximum OMIF request. Before we do that, I want to point out that due to potential negative impacts that COVID-19 may have had on your company's 2020 revenues, Ontario will consider calculating a company's maximum OMIF request based on 40% of your 3-year average revenue figure rather than the standard 2 years. So applicants wishing to request this exception, again, should contact us at least 3 weeks in advance to discuss. Okay, so here's an example for company 1. If a company's revenues were $50,000 in 2019 and $75,000 in 2020, the 2-year average revenue figure would be $62,500. 40% of that amount is $25,000. Therefore, $25,000 would be the maximum amount for which you would be eligible to apply. Company 2 makes more money. In this example, if a company's revenues in 2019 were 2.5 million and revenues in 2020 were 3.125, well, you know, COVID withstanding, 40% of the average revenue figure far exceeds the $350,000 cap. Therefore, the maximum amount for which you would be able to apply is $350,000. So we built this calculator right into the activity budget template, which I'll go over a bit later. All you really need to do is pull the info from your financial statements into the template. And since you are required to submit this financial statements anyway, that shouldn't be too onerous. So once you've established your maximum OMIF request, you can turn your attention to sources of financing. As mentioned earlier, the OMIF can contribute up to 50% of the total budget. The rest is your responsibility. For the most part, applicant contributions can be comprised of a variety of sources. Cash and bank, financed investments such as line of credit, investors, sponsorship, as well as other sources, other government sources of funding. This all applies with a few stipulations. First, no more than 10% of the total budget can be in the form of in-kind or donated services. Applicants must contribute a minimum of 10% of the budget from self-funded sources, and total public funding cannot exceed 75% of the total budget, and that also includes the OMIF contribution. But don't worry too much about this either. We built a few mechanisms right into the budget template that will help you keep this in check. Before I throw back to Aisha, I also want to remind you that applicants bringing a higher percentage of non-government funding will be considered more favorably. It demonstrates sustainability and non-reliance on public support.
Thanks, Michelle. So eligible activities and costs, I'll go over that over the next couple of slides. They must occur and costs must be incurred within each applicant's eligible activity window. I'll be providing an example of the new eligible activity windows and how they work after I provide this overview of the eligible activities and costs. So eligible activities under the OMIF are centered around the creation and promotion of music written and or performed by artists on a label or publisher's roster, and include recording, editing, mixing and mastering, and video production costs. Costs around master license fees may also be eligible, but applicants must prove that the original recording took place within the province within the past 24 months, or evidence that the recording will take place in Ontario. For video production, you'll notice as well must be done in you'll notice a theme. A key Ontario OMIF priority is to encourage economic activity in Ontario-based recording studios and facilities. And so as such, all of the recording and production costs outlined above, as well as any video production costs, must be Ontario-based. Direct tour costs for an artist signed to the applicant company are also eligible but are capped at $40,000 in total tour support costs per artist for a maximum OMIF contribution of $20,000 per artist. And again, keep in mind that Ontario-based spending should be prioritized wherever possible. Other eligible activities include marketing and promotion activities in support of new recordings and/or online performances by Canadian artists signed to the applicant company. Artist development activities such as song camps that are focused on acquiring and registering copyrights in musical compositions and promoting and authorizing the use of these compositions for sync licensing opportunities. Business development activities are also eligible, and we look at how do those activities expand your company's operational activity capacity, such as HR enhancement, strategic business travel, when that again becomes feasible, and things like investing in data analytics. Also, up to 25% of the total activity costs can be claimed for administrative and overhead costs, such as staff salaries, office space, and corporate services that are directly used in the delivery of the planned activities. So sorry, I think we have a double slide there. So to summarize, all costs must relate to Canadian artists with a contractual relationship with the applicant company, must be incurred in Ontario, unless it's for targeted marketing, touring, and showcasing, or business development expenses in which a sound rationale is presented for those costs to be incurred outside the province. Please do keep in mind that applicants proposing a higher percentage of Ontario-based expenses and applicants presenting activities that prioritize support for emerging artists will be considered more favorably. And as we mentioned earlier, for the purposes of the OMIF, an emerging artist is defined as an artist or group that has not achieved gold album status in Canada within the past 6 years and has had no more than 3 gold albums in their career. Exceptions to this definition may be considered if accompanied by a reasonable rationale, but that generally provides quite a broad range of accessibility for artists at all levels. So now that I've talked you through the eligible activities and costs, I want to spend a bit of time just reviewing our new system of determining your eligible spending period. In previous years, the eligible activity window ran from August 1st through to July 31st of the following year. Companies can absolutely stick with that activity window if that's what you're accustomed to and most comfortable with. However, in an effort to provide you and companies across the ecosystem with additional flexibility to undertake activities at the time when it makes the most sense to your business cycles, companies will now have a bit more of a flexible 12-month spending period during which to execute their activities. So as Michelle touched on earlier, activity spending may commence once an application has been submitted at an applicant's own risk, provided that a valid certificate of insurance is in place. Applicants may begin incurring expenses related to their approved activities no earlier than the date of application submission and no later than 90 days following the date of funding approval. So outlined here are a couple of examples, which helps to demonstrate the options available to applicants. And this is also explained in the FAQ section of on the music creation page of the website. So in the first example, Company A has made a decision to start its spending window around June 15th because one of its key artists is going to be recording early in the summer of 2021, and they've not previously applied for that activity. So Company A submits an application, say June 1st, that's 6 weeks prior to the actual final deadline date of July 15th. Company A is then able to commence incurring costs for the proposed activity as of June 15th. As of June 1st. But they decide to start, their first spend happens on June 15th. That means they have a maximum time window of 12 months starting from the date that the company commences their spending. So you'll see that their spending window would then be June 15th, 2021 through to June 14th, 2022. As I mentioned, Company A recognizes that this decision to commence their spending is doing so at their own risk, as there's no guarantee that their application will receive funding or that that specific activity will receive funding when the decisions are announced in October of 2021. In example 2, Company B decides to submit their application on the deadline date of July 15th, and they seem to have some more flexibility with respect to the starting time frame for their activities. So they choose to wait until they've been notified as to whether or not their application has been approved before they commence spending on their activities. So they receive a notification in mid-October that their application has indeed been approved. They have up to 90 days following this funding notification to commence spending on their approved activities. So this will be sometime in January of 2022, depending on the specific date in October that you were notified. They then have a maximum time window of 12 months, starting from the date by which they commence their spending. For example, if spending commences on January 5th, which is right towards the end of that 90-day window, the 12-month clock starts ticking then and would expire on January 4th, 2023. For any applicants that have current funding applications still in cycle with the July 31st, 2021 window, ending to their window, they must clearly demonstrate that their 2021-22 application does not contain any overlap with the activities funded as part of their previous year application. Activities for the 2021 program cycle must be completed with all expenses incurred and all deliverables submitted by the applicant's final report date. So I also wanted to mention that upon receiving a funding notification, recipients have the opportunity to revise their budgets as well as to discuss their specific activity timeframe with the program consultant prior to the execution of the agreement. So the activity dates will be finalized and confirmed with each recipient upon execution of agreement. So there's an opportunity to have some dialogue around what that specific activity starting date is. I know that was a handful and a lot of information to digest, but please do let us know if you have any questions about any of this. The application form is only available through our online application portal. If you're not already registered with a corporate profile, we do encourage you to set one up as quickly as possible so that you'll be able to see the full application. You can find a link to the OAP Quick Start Guide on the music creation page of our site, but we'll just give you a quick overview of the sections so you have an idea of the information we'll require. Section 1 requests just some basic company and contact information. Section 2 requests company details such as ownership structure, key management personnel, and information related to demonstrating eligibility as a label or publisher. Section 3 requests that you indicate whether or not you have a business plan. This is mandatory for applicants requesting $50,000 or more, but for those that request less, there's a section within the application for that information, and Michelle will touch on that in a bit. Section 4 is where you're requested to name and provide a detailed description of each activity, outline the anticipated outcomes, and identify risk management and mitigation plans. We do strongly recommend that you create this content both for the business plan section and the activity section in a separately saved document so that you can just copy and paste it into the OAP template when you're complete so that you have a backup copy. In Section 5, you must acknowledge that your company either has or will be able to obtain at least $2 million in commercial general liability insurance coverage before the grant agreement can be executed. And insurance coverage, as we alluded to before, must cover the full time period for the approved spending window of your activities. There are also a number of supporting documents required. The activity budget template, we'll touch on that quickly in the upcoming slides. The company budget, which must include both actual revenues and expenses for the previous fiscal period, as well as a forecast of revenues and expenses that correspond to the current fiscal year and or to the end of your 2021-22 activity window. This will enable us to review the feasibility of what your company is forecasting based on your track record and demonstrated level of revenue generation and expenditures. It's basically a past, present, and future snapshot. And this budget can be presented in whatever format works for you. And you're welcome to use your own fiscal years for this. The business plan, again, we'll touch a bit more on that shortly. Will require your articles of incorporation, financial statements. So a minimum of notice to reader financial statements are required for the most recently completed fiscal year and the previous fiscal year. Applicants with a December 31st year end are expected to supply 2020 and 2019 financial statements by the application deadline. If you do not already have statements submitted for the deadline, your application may be deemed ineligible or incomplete. We allow 6 months following the end of a fiscal year for you to submit these to us. And this year, the deadline is more than 6 months after the December 31st year end. So we strongly encourage you to reach out to your accountant as soon as possible if you've not already done so, to ensure that you're able to supply those by the deadline date. Also want to flag that for the first time, this is a new policy that internally prepared statements will be accepted for requests that are under 15,000. So this can be in the form of an income statement that you or your bookkeeper have prepared in an Excel or QuickBooks document that gives us an idea of your company's capacity in terms of revenues and expenditures. And then finally, other supporting document is optional, but it certainly will strengthen your application. This would include backup documentation that supports the proposed costs, such as supplier quotes, and documentation that proves the applicant's ability to finance the proposed activities, such as bank statements or letters of confirmation from other funding bodies. Other relevant documentation, such as management or recording and licensing agreements, marketing plans, artist materials, letters of support, and proof of sales are also materials that applicants can choose to submit to strengthen their application. And with that, it's over to Michelle to talk a bit about the budget template.
Thanks, Aisha. Okay, so last program year, we created a new version of the activity budget template that is intended to auto-calculate as much information as possible and present it to both of us in a very clear manner. The first tab contains some brief instructions, and then you will find the financing plan on the second tab, which looks like this. This tab will guide you through the process of ensuring that you're able to calculate your OMIF request, and it will also guide you through a financing plan test to ensure that you are adhering to all of the necessary financing parameters. Again, should you wish to be assessed on a 3-year average revenue figure rather than the typical 2-year average, please let us know ahead of time and we'll discuss it. And if appropriate, we will provide a different activity budget for you to submit. This is very much on a case-by-case basis and for applicants to determine if this exception actually makes sense for them. So it really will only make a material difference for companies that had a significantly low revenue level in 2020, combined with having super strong years in 2018 and 19. If the company was still growing from 2018 and 19, averaging over 3 years may not make a material difference to your 40% maximum. So last year, we also built this cheat sheet into the template for you, clearly listing all of the relevant thresholds so you don't have to keep referring back to your guidelines. This is right on the budget. When all of the activity tabs have been completed correctly and all the numbers reconcile and are within the allowable parameters, the financing plan tab will show that all tests have been passed with the word pass. If any figures do not reconcile or if parameters are exceeded, red flags will appear. Like this. Please don't submit budgets with red flags. If you see the red flag, that means that something isn't right and needs to be amended. The budget summary tab will auto-populate based on the amounts that are entered in each of the separate activity tabs. There is absolutely nothing you need to fill in on this page. The summary also provides a snapshot of both the admin and overhead and in-kind costs being claimed. You can see there at the bottom. Like on the sources of financing tab, a built-in test will indicate if either of these parameters are non-compliant. Business plans. I feel like Aisha built up what I was going to say about business plans. A business plan is required for applicants that are requesting $50,000 or more, but it is optional for those requesting under that amount. If you're requesting less than 50,000 and do not have a business plan, the application schema will direct you to answer specific questions about your business, much like those that would be included in a traditional business plan. Specifically, we are looking for you to provide detail regarding your company. This is your applicant profile. It's an overview. This should include key information such as your business model, your track record, profiles of key individuals. We would also like to see an outline of your company's plans and objectives for the short term, which we consider to be the next 12 months, as well as long-term growth and sustainability goals. Finally, we would like to see your company SWOT analysis, which is a discussion of your company's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. For applicants requiring a full business plan, you have the flexibility to structure your plan as it best suits your business. Essentially, we're looking for you to speak to the elements listed here and provide us with a business case for funding. We highly recommend that this document range between 10 and 25 pages. Business plans should also speak to the impacts that COVID-19 have had on your company. We recognize that recovery efforts in maintaining business operations are a main priority for music companies, especially at this moment. And yes, the assessment process will take into account the importance of resilience and sustainability in the 2021 program year. Should you be interested in more information on how to structure your business plan, we will be adding this topic to the FAQs this year, which you can access directly from the Ontario Creates website. Speaking of the assessment process, please see pages 10 and 11 in the guidelines for an outline of our assessment criteria. This is exactly what we take into consideration when assessing your application, so it certainly can't hurt to review the section of the guidelines more than once. Track record. This is worth 15% of your overall score. Does your company demonstrate that it has the track record and the organizational capacity to effectively execute the activities? How present is diversity among senior leadership, staff, and/or contract employees? Financial risk, 10%. How effectively do you articulate your company's financial capacity to undertake the proposed activities? And how stable is your financial position? Overall proposal, this is a big one. This is worth 30% of your overall score. Are your proposed activities and budgets feasible, appropriate, and achievable for your company? Is the proposal thorough, well-written, and practical? I'm going to throw in spell check your application. Does your proposal demonstrate thoughtful consultation, collaboration, and participation with equity-seeking communities? Economic and cultural impact, 20%. Does your application thoroughly articulate the return on investment, ROI, for your company, such as critical success, growth in sales, revenue, audience share, etc.? Also, what is the broader impact of your activities on the industry and the province? What are the anticipated tangible, measurable results of your activities? So what we're looking for here is job creation, increased recording activity, economic impact for your company and for the province. Resilience and sustainability, worth 15% of your overall score. Does your proposal demonstrate forward-thinking strategic planning, particularly in light of the COVID-19 crisis? Do the activities position your company for long-term growth and sustainability? And finally, support for emerging talent. To what degree does your application focus on supporting and developing emerging artists? Keep these questions in mind as you're crafting your application, because all of these assessment criteria tie back to the program objectives. Applications that speak directly to these objectives will rank higher than those that do not. You'll also note that diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria are now embedded across multiple assessment sections. Within your application, particularly in the activity descriptions, please ensure to speak to any tangible initiatives that your company has already undertaken or plans to undertake with respect to improving or further embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion within your operations and activities. Applicant companies that are owned or led by members of equity-seeking communities may, if it's appropriate and relevant, choose to speak to lived experiences as it relates to their operation. This shift is a reflection of our intentional attempt to lead to more BIPOC-owned companies being funded, as well as encouraging all companies to take further steps towards increasing diversity among their staff, their artist rosters, operational practices, in order to achieve greater representation of equity-seeking communities. These are broader program objectives that we trust will lead to a more diverse and equitable music industry. This integrated approach places more emphasis on DEI across the board, rather having it as a separate value as we did last year. And it underscores our expectation that this should be an upfront consideration for companies across various criteria. And with this approach, it carries more weight in the scoring process. Ultimately, applicants that best demonstrate DEI across the board will score higher than those who don't. And we're just wrapping up here. So before we move on to your questions, I also want to remind